Good morning, scholars, and welcome back to Learning with Mrs. Preemy. Today we're working on A New Nation, Lesson 3. Today's learning goal is I can identify the main topic of the shot heard round the world and retell key details of the informational read aloud. Yesterday, we talked about the Boston Tea Party, and I just Googled it and found this little video I'd like you to go ahead and watch.
Smishing and a splashing over the horizon, what can it be? The pilgrims sailed the sea to find a place to call their own. In their ship Mayflower, they hoped to find a better home. They finally knocked on Plymouth Rock, and someone said, "We're there." It may not look like home, but at this point I don't care. Oh, they were missing Mother England. They swore their loyalty until the very end. Anything you say, King, it's okay, King. You know it's kind of scary on your own. Gonna build a new land the way we planned. Could you help us run it till it's grown? They planted corn, you know. They built their houses one by one. And bit by bit they worked until the colonies were done. They looked around, yeah, up and down, and someone said, "Hooray! If the king could only see us now, he would be proud of us today." They knew that now they'd run their own land. But George III still vowed he'd rule them to the end. Anything I say, do it my way now. Anything I say, do it my way. Don't you get to feeling independent, 'cause I'm gonna force you to obey. He taxed their property, he didn't give them any choice. And back in England, he didn't give them any voice. That's called taxation without representation, and it's not fair. But when the colonies complained, the king said, "I don't care." He even has the nerve to tax our cup of tea. To put it kindly, King, we really don't agree. Gonna show you how we feel. We're gonna dump this tea and turn this harbor into the biggest cup of tea in history. They wanted no more Mother England. They knew the time had come for them to take command. It's very clear you're being unfair, King. No matter what you say, we won't obey. Gonna hold a revolution now, King, and we're gonna run it all away with no more king.
We're gonna elect a president.
No more king.
He's gonna do what the people want.
No more king.
We're gonna run things our way.
No more king.
Nobody's gonna tell us what to do.
Rocking and a rolling, swishing and a splashing over the horizon. What can it be? Looks like it's going to be a free country.
Hey, I don't own any rights to that video. It's up here on, if you just Google Tea Party, Schoolhouse Rock, No More Kings, you can get this video. It's up online. Okay? All right. So in the beginning, here in the United States, then we talked about the fact that there were originally Native Americans here. Then Christopher Columbus came, and then the Pilgrims came. Okay. The Pilgrims were not the only English people to settle in North America. By the early 1700s, people from Great Britain had settled in 13 different colonies along the East Coast. So right here, originally, Maine was part of Massachusetts, so we have the 13 colonies here. So it was Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, Rhode Island's just this little tiny state, Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. That made up the 13 colonies that were originally started by British people. Many of the people who lived in the colonies originally came from Great Britain. The 13 separate colonies or places along the coast of North America were where British settled. The people governing and controlling the colonies, however, still lived in Great Britain. So as the British colonies grew, more help was needed, and people from Africa were forced into being slaves by the colonists to help clear and farm the lands. So what is freedom? Freedom is the ability to choose, right? The ability to choose anything. The freedom to choose your clothing. The freedom to choose what time to go to bed. The freedom to choose what to eat for lunch. Those are all freedoms. Did slaves have any freedoms? No, they didn't have any freedoms. So after the 13 colonies were produced, then what we talked about yesterday was the Boston Tea Party. Is this the kind of tea party that you would have at home? No, this is where they threw all the tea into the Boston Harbor, right? So why was it that the king and the British Parliament started taxing colonies on goods that they purchased, such as tea, for example? So they did want to make some extra money. It cost them a lot to set up and protect the colonies. Were the British colonists happy about being taxed? How come? Why were they not? No, they were angry because they felt it was unfair to be taxed. Because they didn't have representation in the British Parliament to help decide how much the tax should be or what to spend those taxes on. What did the colonists do in response? And what is the event called? Right, the colonists dumped the British tea into the Boston Harbor, and that event was called the Boston Tea Party. You need to remember that taxes are extra money that are paid for goods that you buy, that the government uses to help pay for public services like schools, police and fire protection, water and garbage services. And representative is someone elected to help to represent a larger group. The Boston Tea Party didn't solve the problems of tea being taxed. It just made the King of Great Britain so angry that he closed the port and no supplies could get in or out of Boston. This led to a meeting called the First Continental Congress, where representatives from the colonies met to decide what to do. Some colonists wanted to remain loyal to the king, and they were called loyalists, whereas others wanted to rule themselves, and they were called patriots. You're learning about some important events that led to the creation of our country or nation, the United States of America. So we're going to take a look at today's story. And as I'm just going to roll through these pictures a little bit. And while I'm going through them, I want you to think about what the main topic or the main idea of this story could be. I'm just going to preview these pictures and think about what it is you're seeing in these and what you think today's story might be about. Oh no. Let's see. Oh, that's a different story. So There's not tons of pictures, but go ahead and maybe talk to mom or dad, or pause the video and talk to somebody about what you think today's story is going to be about. Okay. Listen carefully to find out whether or not your predictions about the main topic are correct. After the Boston Tea Party, King George sent thousands of British soldiers to Boston to make sure the colonists obeyed the king's order, or to make sure the colonists did as the king ordered them to do. They swarmed the streets of the city in their fancy red uniforms with shiny buttons, earning themselves the name of Redcoats. They carried weapons with them everywhere they went. This made the people of Boston very angry. The city no longer felt like home to them. They did not know whom to trust. Spies, or people who secretly kept watch on other people to try to figure out what they were up to, spread out all over the city. British soldiers distinguished as colonists, and British soldiers disguised as colonists, and colonists disguised as British soldiers. There was a lot of whispering in the streets as people kept secrets from one another. It was not very pleasant and even a little scary. Paul Revere was a silversmith living in Boston. As a silversmith, he was kept quite busy making and repairing silver dinnerware, candlesticks, and jewelry. A sign with a silver picture hung outside his shop on the town square. So let's take a look at this. In those days, it was common for shopkeepers to hang signs above their doors with pictures of what could be bought inside their shop. Do you remember this picture of the Boston shop? You saw it in yesterday's story. This was a picture of Paul Revere's silversmith shop. One day, the door to his shop flew open and a friend rushed over to Revere's side. The two men were both members of the Sons of Liberty, a group of patriots who had emptied the tea into the Boston harbor. Ever since the Boston Tea Party, the colonists of Massachusetts had been hiding weapons, gunpowder and cannonballs, in neighboring towns. The British, afraid the colonists might be planning to attack them, captured the weapons whenever they learned where they were hidden. Why do you think the colonists might have started hiding these materials? Now, as the two men huddled together in the back of Paul Revere's shop, his friend whispered that the British were planning to raid the colonists' storehouse of weapons in the town of Concord. The British were to travel that night, he said, but nobody knew whether they would march there by land or choose the shorter route and sail on a boat by sea. The patriots knew they must somehow warn the militia in the Concord. A militia is an army of ordinary people. It's not trained soldiers. Revere asked a friend to spy or secretly watch over the British to discover the soldiers' plans. Then he arranged for a signal to be given, a secret code to let him know the answer to his question. His friend was to climb up the bell tower of the Old North Church, light one lantern and hang it by the belfry, or the bell tower. If the British are traveling on foot by land, Revere told his friend, but they are traveling by boat by sea, hang two lanterns. That night, after dark, Paul Revere left his family and crept down to the banks of Charles River. He quietly rowed his boat across the river to spot where the fellow patriots waited with a horse, saddled and ready to go. Mounting the horse, Paul Revere watched the church, waiting patiently for a signal. It wasn't long before he spotted a light in the tower. One light, then two. Ah, he said to himself, just as I thought, they'd chosen the quickest way by water, where fewer people were apt or able to see them. Then I shall go by land, arriving before they do. Tipping his hat, in thanks to the patriots, he sped away. He galloped through the towns, and along the way Revere shouted to the colonists in their beds, "The redcoats are coming! The redcoats are coming!" All around him, shutters were thrown open as people began waking in the middle of the night. When Revere reached the town of Lexington with word of the approaching British troops, men hurried from their homes, joining one another with their muskets in the middle of the town. These men, known as the Minutemen, because they were expected to be ready to fight at a minute's notice, slept with their muskets and gunpowder beside their bed. At dawn, the British reached Lexington. The Minutemen were farmers and shopkeepers, volunteers for their country, not trained soldiers. Volunteers choose to do a job without being paid. They looked ragged next to the well-dressed British soldiers, or redcoats. In the confusion of the early morning hours, a shot was fired. Others fired back. The fighting continued throughout the morning. Finally, the Minutemen were able to force the British to return to Boston, firing at them from behind rocks, trees, and fences all along the way. To do this, no one knows who fired the first shot that day. Nerves have been on edge since Boston Tea Party, so it is not surprising that the guns went off. That first shot was the beginning of a long war between the British and their American colonies. It is known as the shot heard around the world because not only did it change life in the colonies, but it also changed things around the world in Great Britain, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. Here's Great Britain. Here's the United States of America, and the 13 colonies are right along here. Let's see if I can bring it in a little bit. These are the 13 colonies, starting with what used to be Massachusetts, and going all the way down here to Georgia. Okay? So, Britain is literally on the other side of the world from the British colonies. So the people in Great Britain couldn't actually hear the shot fired that morning. This famous saying simply means that the shot had a big effect on Great Britain and on the entire world. Okay. That long war became known as the Revolutionary War. Could it be that the shot heard around the world rang out so loudly from the Massachusetts colony that it actually reached King George's ears that April morning? What do you think? So, just as I just said, they couldn't actually hear it because it was too far. But it did have a big impact on Great Britain. So, were your predictions correct about the main topic in this read aloud? What is the main topic of the read aloud? Yep, Paul Revere helped get the Minutemen ready to fight the British, and the Revolutionary War started with the Battle of Lexington. This is the Battle of Lexington here. Okay. Why do you think Paul Revere was willing to do this? He was because he was a patriot. What does the well-known phrase, one if by land and two if by sea means? It refers to the signal right here. It refers to this signal for Paul Revere 1 lantern meant the redcoats were coming by land, and 2 meant they were coming by sea. Who were the redcoats? They were the British Army. Who were the Minutemen? So right down here, the Colonial Minutemen, they were the Colonial Militia. Okay. In this read aloud, you heard the Minutemen were farmers and shopkeepers, volunteers for their country, not trained soldiers. Say the word volunteers. Volunteers are people who do something without getting paid or told to do it. So there are many volunteers at the fire station. I'm going to describe a situation. If it describes people helping out without being paid or told to do something, you're going to say they are volunteers. If it does not, you're going to say they are not volunteers. So Tony and John were paid $10 to rake leaves in their neighbor's yard. Tony and John are not volunteers. Lisa and Pablo offered to pick up litter on the playground. They are volunteers. The teacher was amazed that 10 students asked if they could help clean up the art supplies. Those 10 students are volunteers. Maria and Hannah were paid $5 to babysit their little brother. Maria and Hannah are not volunteers. Jeff and Leela asked if they could take their grandparents' dog for a walk. And Jeff and Leela are volunteers. So now we have these here. So again, we can go through the history of the United States a little bit. It started with the Native Americans who were living here peacefully. And then Columbus came. And then the Pilgrims came. And then the 13 colonies were settled. And then the Boston Tea Party came. And now we have the Revolutionary War. Okay? All right. So now I have this. We're going to talk about this read aloud. Well, I'll do the talking since I can't really hear you right now. You're not expected to be able to read what I write because you're still learning some rules for decoding. You might be able to read some of it though. We're gonna, let's see. I'm gonna write some things on here about this story so I don't forget them. I'm going to write in this box right here, next to where it says somebody, I'm going to write the redcoats. Right here, I'm going to put in a little box. The redcoats. Let's see, what was it that the redcoats wanted? They wanted to take the colonists' weapons. So the redcoats wanted to take the colonists' weapons. Somebody, the redcoats, wanted to take the colonists' weapons, but Paul Revere warned the colonists so then what happened? So the redcoats encountered the Minutemen. Then what happened? The redcoats, wanted to take the colonists' weapons, but Paul Revere warned the colonists. So the redcoats encountered the Minutemen. Then there was the shot heard round the world. That's what happened. I'm going to put in this. So the redcoats, wanted to take the colonists' weapons, but Paul Revere warned the colonists, so the redcoats encountered the Minutemen. Then there was the shot heard around the world. This is summarizing what we just read. Okay? So that's a little bit of a summary. Let me bring this picture back up for you. So proverbs are short traditional sayings that have been passed along orally from generation to generation. These sayings usually express general truths based on the experiences and observations of everyday life. Although some proverbs do have literal meaning, that is, they mean exactly what they say, many proverbs have a richer meaning beyond the literal level. So, have you ever heard this saying, let the cat out of the bag? Go ahead and say that. Let the cat out of the bag. If somebody let the cat out of the bag, that person told a secret. The redcoats were probably angry that Paul Revere let the cat out of the bag by warning the colonists that the redcoats were coming. In other words, Paul Revere told the redcoats secrets. Have you ever let the cat out of the bag? Or did you know of anybody that let the cat out of the bag? For example, my sister let the cat out of the bag and told me, my sister let the cat out of the bag and told me about the surprise party my mom was planning for me. So today, what I'm going to have you do is talk about letting the cat out the bag with mom or dad or guardians or whoever's home with you. And then I would like you to draw a picture and write about the meaning of this saying, let the cat out of the bag. So when you're done with that, when you're done with your picture and you have written at least 2 sentences about what you drew, then I would like you to take a picture of it and upload it to Class Dojo for me. Okay, so today's learning goal was I can identify the main topic of the shot heard around the world and retell key details of the informational read aloud. So you should be able to retell this story to mom or dad or whoever's around you, or at least talk about the story. And then make sure you upload your picture that you create for me. And thank you for joining me today. This was New Nation, Lesson 3 of CKLA. And I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.